Hello there and welcome to today's show. I'm Jessy Chahal. Thank you for joining me at midday and that too midweek right here on The Brief. It's Wednesday. On the show today, Ravi Chandran of the Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia joins me. We'll be talking taxes. And shortly joining me is Nordin Abdullah, who will walk us through the nation's food security and Asia, apparently big economic shocks. We'll come back to that, but for now, here's the news in brief. Malaysia's recorded over 12,000 new COVID-19 cases just yesterday. And according to COVID Now, recoveries continue to outpace new infections with over 20,000 individuals currently in recovery. And an update on the immunization program. As of yesterday, 33,000 children aged between 5 and 11 have completed their doses of the vaccine under the PIC Kids program, whereas 38.1% of the population have received at least one dose. Meanwhile, for adults, COVID Now records that 67.5% have received their booster jabs. Meanwhile, the Terengganu government has expressed concerns over some parents risking the health of their children by tagging them along during Ramadan bazaars. Now, news from East Malaysia. The Sabah government has issued the latest SOP and guidelines for non-Muslim worship houses, set to come into effect this weekend on Saturday, April 9th, in line with the country's transition to the endemic phase. And here's some update in sports. A national swimmer, Arvind Sean Singh Chahal, is eyeing to pull off a surprise at the Hanoi SEA Games in Vietnam this May 12th to 23rd. Arvind will be representing Malaysia competing in the men's 200 meters individual medley, 4 by 100 meters and 4 by 200 meters lifestyle relay. And it's time now to bring in Nordin Abdullah to talk us through what's happening in terms of food security in the country and in the region, as well as to take a quick look at some economic. Nordin, welcome back on board here. At this point of time, from sources as well, we know that Sarawak does play a crucial role in supporting the country's efforts in safeguarding food security. And what more now, the Federal Minister of Agriculture and Food Industry has said much improvement is needed to enhance the food security in Sarawak. Nordin, walk us through this.
Well, Jessy, one of the things when we look at food security, we've got to take a nationwide approach. But there are certain parts in the country which are better suited or have a high potential for growth. For me, Sarawak is one of those key areas. We've seen from maybe 20 years back when Sarawak looked to develop a huge halal hub in the area of Tanjung Manis. This still remains a viable project if the investment is forthcoming. What we need to see, of course, is increased levels of self-sufficiency in certain crops. That is a baseline for food security in the country. But at the same time, Sarawak has a lot to offer the food security equation. Now, a lot of people look at food security as just growing food. This is not the full picture. We need to look at other areas as well, as including energy security. And Sarawak is the one place in the country that has huge amounts of hydroelectricity production. And over the next 20 years, we'll have increased hydroelectricity production. So it's about keeping the crop and the food viable from the farm all the way to the fork. And the only way to do that is with energy security and ensure that it's properly refrigerated and taken care of. So that with good weather, huge amounts of water, and plenty of land. The only gap that I see, only two gaps at the moment I see, is a need for increased investment and, of course, human capital. So the equation, if you don't have the human capital, you've got to invest more into machinery and automation. So this is going to be what the future looks like if Sarawak and Malaysia continues to look at getting the food security equation right for the country.
Mhm. Here's also a quick, bit of information from the Day One Rakyat. Malaysia's rankings in the Global Food Security Index, or GSFI, has plunged to 48th position, or rather did that in 2022 due to the change in indicators that determine the placings. Last month in Day One Rakyat, Deputy Agriculture and Food Industry Minister Datuk Seri Ahmad Hamzah has said that Malaysia ranked 28th among 113 countries in 2019. So with these figures and these positions also, um, what determines these key indicators and how they determine placings as well, Nordin?
Well, Jesse, when you look at rankings, sometimes they can be a little bit misleading, and especially when things are shifting there, and it takes a while for everyone to catch up to the new norm, as it were, in the rankings. But I think what we've got to look at is what the government is doing to make sure that the average man on the street has food, and the right type of food. So one component is, yes, does everyone have food? But the other part is, do we have enough nutrients that people can get their hands on? So we've seen how the government in Malaysia has kept prices down in terms of cooking oil. We're seeing here rice, as well as proteins is another key area, is in chicken. But what I think when we look at those bigger indicators on a national level, we're looking at some of the imports and the versus exports. Malaysia still continues to import a huge amount of high value food. This is because the middle class is expanding in Malaysia. So with that, we need to actually increase the export of higher value food. Again, it comes down to increasing the type of high value food production here in the country. So when we start to look at food security, it's more about the energy equation. It's more about the financial equation than just the simple agricultural production.
Speaking of financial equation, Nordin, our next topic, looking at Asia as a region and big economic shocks. Now, the World Bank is saying that countries in the region may have to deal with three major economic shocks. Firstly, the war in Ukraine, which is ongoing right now, a sharp slowdown in China, and rate hikes in or from the US Federal Reserve as well. The Development Bank says cuts, or rather has cut its 2022 growth forecast for East Malaysia and the Pacific region from 5% to 5.4%, and also has warned that the growth in slump could happen in phases if conditions weaken further. So this is going to affect about 6 million people and plunge them into poverty as well. Dangerous situation at hand.
Dangerous, Jesse, and I think that's where we see all of this come together in a perfect storm of a crisis. Why, for me, I think the Russian-Ukraine is actually the most critical in this is because it's actually impacting food security. And we're talking about exports of key commodities out of Ukraine and Russia. And that type of disruption actually impacts the average man on the street. So when we look at that and then we add into the context of China slowing down their economic growth rate, that means what you're selling on the global market, it may you may get a reduced return on what is being sold. So these two things coming together at the same time with the US putting up their interest rate will mean that it's a little bit harder to get that balance right. So when we start to look at what Asia can do, Asia is actually one of those areas in the global economy that's actually growing faster than a lot of other parts of the world. So the solution is forward, and the way out of this crisis is hard work and innovation, and it really comes down to which countries, which economies, which supply chains are going to be the most innovative and most productive. So this is where we need to start to shift our thinking in terms of what Malaysia's human capital does to avoid this type of crisis.
Nordin, thanks for your insights and weighing in. We'll speak to you soon. That was Nordin Abdullah, Crisis Management Analyst, weighing in on the region's economic growth, perhaps, and perhaps some impending shocks, as well as looking at the nation's food security. Well, we move on now into business in brief. The ringgit retreated from yesterday's gain to open lower against the US dollar. This is because of the global geopolitical tension that is happening. As of 9 a.m. today, $1 is 4 ringgit 21 cent versus yesterday's 4 ringgit 20 cent. And from the ringgit to the stock market, Bursa opened marginally lower but turned positive shortly after. Trading was mixed and cautious, taking the cue from overnight weaker performance on Wall Street. At 9:05 a.m., the FBM KLCI was 0.56 of a point better at 1597.35. Yesterday, the market closed a little shorter. Meanwhile, gold price today is 252 ringgit 25 per gram. And here's Bank Negara's outlook for today. Short-term rates are expected to remain stable today on Bank Negara Malaysia's operations to absorb surplus liquidity from the financial system. Liquidity is estimated at 47.18 billion ringgit in the conventional system and 24.84 billion in Islamic funds. And according to the Asian Development Bank, growth in developing Asia would likely be slower than the previous year. The bloc's combined economy, which includes China and India, was projected to expand 5.2% this year. This is sharply lower than previous year's growth of 6.9%. Well, it looks like these figures and numbers are going to affect many segments of society and many countries as well across the globe as we look at geopolitical tensions that is happening as well. But what's happening very soon for many Malaysians, of course, is filing our taxes. And today we cover something that's daunting for most of us. And of course, that is good old taxes. What are the changes and how do we file them? Well, the last 2 years, of course, has been a difficult time for Malaysians to file taxes in person. Many, of course, did it online. With the economy and the country now fully open, people and corporations are required to put their statements together. With the tax system, though, there's always something that needs to be updated when housekeeping is done. Well, joining me at this time is Ravi Chandran, Deputy Director of the Kuala Lumpur Bandar branch at the Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia. Welcome on board, Ravi. It's good to speak to you again, that too at such a crucial time. Do walk us through what are the challenges encountered by LHDN after the 2 years dealing with the pandemic, and are there any issues concerning the lack of response on time in terms of tax payments, and will we be seeing higher rates of tax evasion as well, Ravi? We're waiting for a signal from Ravi's side. I believe a bit of a technical connection issue there. I can see Ravi dialing back in just a couple of minutes. We hope to get him back on for our viewers watching as well. Okay, we will try to get Ravi back online in just a short bit. But of course, here's a quick look at what's happening in international news. If I can just bring that on for you. Firstly, Pakistan's Supreme Court has adjourned a hearing to decide Prime Minister Imran Khan's legality blocking off an opposition bid to oust him. This, of course, is some latest updates. The dispute has thrown the country into a political turmoil following Khan losing his parliamentary majority that happened just last week, where he faced a no confidence vote by a united position. Meanwhile, President Pedro Castillo lifted a curfew order on Tuesday afternoon following widespread protests against rising fuel and fertilizer prices triggered by the Ukraine conflict. Castillo also issued a sudden curfew that was minutes before midnight on Monday in an attempt to curb nationwide protests. But the curfew backfired as thousands poured into the streets to defy what they saw as a violation of civil liberty. And we take you back now to a little bit of what's happening and what's trending in business as we try to get our guests back online. The ringgit retreated from yesterday's gain to open lower against the US dollar. This is because of the global geopolitical tension. As of 9 a.m., $1 US is now 4 ringgit 21 cent versus yesterday's 4 ringgit 20 cent. And at the stock market, Bursa opened slightly lower but turned positive positive shortly after. Trading was mixed and cautious, taking cue from the overnight weaker performance on Wall Street. As of 9:05 a.m., the FBM KLCI was 0.56 of a point better at 1597.35. And meanwhile, for those of you looking at purchasing gold, gold price today stands at 252 ringgit 25 cent per gram. And we look towards bringing our guests back online. In the meantime, here's a news update that's just come in from the Malaysia External Trade Development Corporation, or MATRADE. They say that they hope for enhanced trade collaboration with South Korea as global trade elevates and Malaysia moves into the pre-endemic state, with a full reopening of borders, of course, happening right now as we speak as well. While we get into an endemic phase and state, of course, there are still SOPs to adhere to. But this time, rather than all the very many SOPs, it is one SOP with 10 requirements. Let's take a look. There you go, one SOP, 10 requirements. Among the 10 requirements, of course, still maintaining physical distancing, the 1 meter distance, and of course, also wearing your mask. Hand hygiene, still very, very important. And for outlets, at restaurants and offices, operating hours as well have to be adhered to, including your registration on MySejahtera and ensuring that you scan each time you enter a new premise. And if possible, be in open areas as well where there's a lot of ventilation. Ultimately, do not forget your vaccination. At this point of time, I'm joined by Gerard Ratnam to take us through a little bit about what our guest was about to share in terms of taxes with LHDN. Hi, Gerard, welcome. We have a black screen at this point of time, unable to get any visuals. While that's being fixed, let me just reiterate that, of course, it's time this month, every April, for us to file our taxes. This year, of course, many changes, and we also need to look at how we file them. The last 2 years has been purely online. This time, you're able to go down in person as well, and of course, post any of your questions and queries to the staff and the officers at the LHDN office. Welcome, Gerard. Thanks for joining me on the brief today. What do you have for us?
Well, we'll be having a couple of shows happening this week. One very interesting thing happening this afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for what happened with the technical glitch we have with the IRB or LHDN. But having said that, we're working on a couple of shows this afternoon. We are going to be talking to someone who has a very interesting concept. So if you watched this woman, Marie Kondo, before, teaching people how to declutter, she's going to be talking about decluttering, especially during the festivities. So now it's Ramadan, and during Ramadan, people, cleanse themselves. They're going through a process of introspection. Decluttering is one of them. So that's going to be featured this afternoon. Sonia Aisha is going to be doing that. And come Friday with the Nation This Week, we also have an interesting lineup to talk about certain issues, especially about Bahasa Melayu or Bahasa Malaysia. That's going to be happening on Friday with regards to the Nation This Week. So very interesting lineup of people coming on this week as we move forward. In the meantime, what we're trying to do is get in touch with our friends at the IRB or the Inland Revenue Board to get more of an update from them. But we don't know if that's going to be successful today. But having said that, have you already filed your taxes? I'm in the midst of doing that right now, Jess.
I was just about coming to that. On a personal note, though, every year when it comes around this time, I do get a little bit anxious because I wonder if I've missed out on something, or I haven't looked at perhaps some area that I should be, concerned about. What are some of your concerns during this time, and if you could share some bits and nuggets of advice, perhaps for those filing taxes this time. Or for those who have not filed for many years. I was once in that position as well. Clear now. There seems to be a bit of a lag on our side. We're waiting for audio signal as well. I've got another news that's just come through as well as we receive updates real time here. The Indonesian government has reimposed a visa-free visit policy for citizens of fellow ASEAN member countries. Of course, this is quoting the Ministry of Law and Human Rights on Tuesday. People from these Southeast Asia countries are only required to show proof of COVID-19 vaccination and a negative PCR taken 48 hours prior to arrival, and use the Peduli Lindungi test and track app on their mobile phone. Indonesia, of course, reimposes visa-free visit for ASEAN nationals. I guess with the border opening now, and there are many more exemptions, and looking at how we can make things more seamless in that sense as well, it was called a global reset. And I think under many circumstances, many facets of SOPs and red tape has been eased. We're looking at an easier way of doing business, trade, so on and so forth in the new norm. Well, this too is just come in. Petronas has been named the best country to work for in Malaysia for a second year in a row. It continues to be the top ranked company from last year in 2022, linked in top companies list in Malaysia, which is the second annual ranking of the 15 best workplaces to grow one's career. Of course, LinkedIn said the country's fully integrated oil and gas company, which is committed to upskill its employees to adapt rapidly in terms of a changing business environment, topped this list. Others on that list: Maybank, Bosch, PNB, and Brown. Well, it's time to take you now to international news, where we hope that in the meantime, where we hope we can get our guests back online. But nonetheless, Britain has urged G7 and NATO nations to ban Russian ships from their ports and agree on a timetable to phase out Russian oil and gas imports. Russian ships have already been banned from British ports, and the country and its allies have already sanctioned Russian banks and taken steps to cut Moscow off from the international financial system. Meanwhile, at the actual war zone, tensions between Russia and Ukraine have intensified after hundreds of murdered civilians were allegedly found following the withdrawal of Russian forces. Russian Defense Ministry reports destroying a Ukrainian training base using a high-precision missile, which was also being used as a camp for foreign mercenaries. And at least 280 people, including children, were found dead after the Ukrainian army retook control of a town from the Russian military. And in other news, in Japan, robots are a growing trend in the country, with a recent development at the University of Tokyo showing a dual-armed robot peeling bananas in just about 3 minutes. Researchers believe that training robots to do simple human tasks can help support Japan's growing labor shortage problem, especially in industries that are highly dependent on human labor. And in at the Basra's fifth flower exhibition aimed at encouraging citizens to green their gardens. Once known for its lush gardens and orchards, the province of Basra has become victim of desertification and consequences of climate change, wars, and the oil industry. The exhibition is set to remain open throughout the month of Ramadan, offering visitors the opportunity to spend time of course, in greenery and surrounded by a sanctuary of flowers, as well as to buy their own greens. And here's a look at what's trending on Twitter right now. Malaysia fans of badminton continues to cheer on our local athletes this time around the Korean Open 2022. Of course, we're all looking forward to witnessing a stellar performance from our very own Malaysian team. Meanwhile, Malaysia Boleh as well. In music, our very own Siti Nurhaliza is trending after the singer took the 26th spot on the list of the top 100 most awarded musicians of all time, closely following Mariah Carey and Coldplay. Kudos to our very own singing sweetheart, Siti Nurhaliza. Of course, those hashtags is hashtag Korea Open 2022 and hashtag Siti Nurhaliza. Well, it's time for me to log off at this point. This has been the midday edition of The Brief. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jessy Chahal. See you again soon. Bye-bye.